DW Inside Europe.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. On today's programme, the EU reaches a deal with Viktor Orban to release critical aid to Ukraine. But what do the tensions in the run-up to the summit reveal about the rocky road ahead? We get the view from Brussels.
And we have Putin's best servant sitting at the table in the European Council, blocking our support and our credibility at this crucial stage.
And from Budapest.
But on the other hand, they also feel that Brussels is really too imperialistic.
Also, as Europe's farmers' protests continue, we hear from a French motorway blockade and a food systems expert with an ambitious vision for the future of how we feed and farm. You could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from Brussels this Thursday as it was announced that a deal had been reached at a specially convened summit to release €50 billion worth of aid for Ukraine. The hold-up had been due to the opposition of one man, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who had been blocking the required unanimous approval on a multi-year budget since December. A deal has been reached this time, but as Terry Schultz reports, no one in Brussels expects the problems to end here.
Patience is finally running out with Viktor Orban's repeated blockades of European Union unanimity and what's officially called his serious and persistent breaches of EU values. A session of the European Parliament in January was devoted to recapping the December meeting of EU leaders and previewing the special February 1st summit required because of Orban's rejection of aid to Ukraine. There, lawmaker after lawmaker demanded the bloc do something to stop him. Here's German Green Group leader Terry Reinke.
Ukrainians are fighting also for our freedom. And we have Putin's best servant sitting at the table in the European Council, blocking our support and our credibility at this crucial stage. This is a joke, and this is a very bad joke, especially when the member states actually have the tools to stop this.
These tools include freezing more funds intended for Hungary, or even stopping Orban and his government from having a vote in EU meetings under Article 7.2 of the EU treaty, which has never been used. On January 18th, a majority of EU parliamentarians approved a non-binding resolution calling for that. But it's not something the European Parliament can do. It can only pressure EU leaders and the European Commission to initiate it. The measure also demanded an investigation into why the Commission unfroze more than €10 billion for Budapest just before a key vote on starting membership talks with Ukraine. Orban abstained from that vote by going to the bathroom. Finnish lawmaker Petri Sarvamaa had already circulated a petition throughout the legislature asking his colleagues to support suspension of voting rights. Speaking ahead of the February 1st European Council meeting, Sarvamaa said whatever happened there would not deter him from continuing to push for this sanction.
The bigger development on Article 7 will, of course, take a little bit more time. But if the deal falls and Hungary vetoes, then I think things will move very fast. Maybe even surprisingly fast.
Yanis Amanalidis, a senior policy expert with the European Policy Center, agrees that for the first time, this is actually possible, whether or not it's probable.
Orban had always been one step ahead politically of the others. He was actually outmaneuvering often member states and EU institutions because he knows how the EU operates. He knows that, the others, in this case 26, have to get their act together, have to agree. But now you see that there is more of a readiness also on the side of the 26 to increase the political pressures and play, the political hard game with him. And let's see how he will react.
Incidentally, in July, it's Hungary's turn as the rotating president of the Council of the European Union, which means it will chair all gatherings of ministers for the following 6 months. The bloc may be simultaneously considering removing Hungary's voting rights from the meetings it will be leading. Terry Schultz, DW, Brussels.
So that's the view from Brussels. But what about Budapest? How have the weeks of sour communication and will he, won't he suspense played domestically for Viktor Orban? What has he stood to gain from keeping the EU waiting right up until the last minute for a decision on funds for Ukraine? And what does this indicate about the challenges that lie ahead? To find out, I spoke to our Budapest correspondent Stefan Boss, who explained how the tetchy run-up to the summit had looked from Viktor Orban's perspective.
Obviously, he wants to maintain good relations with Russia, in part because Hungary is very much dependent on natural gas supplies and oil supplies from Russia, much more even than many Western countries. The other side of the story is really that he feels that in the backyard of Hungary, in Ukraine, hundreds of thousands of people are dying, including also, I have to say, ethnic Hungarians who have been called up to fight in the army. And he says it's only common sense to end this conflict because he feels it cannot be won on the battlefield. And he hopes that the EU will support him in his call for peace talks. And even if that would mean, presumably, that Ukraine would lose some of its territory.
What about Hungarian public opinion more generally, Stefan?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, if you speak with people in Budapest, there is quite some criticism towards the Prime Minister Viktor Orban. But outside Budapest, I would say many people would agree with him. They also see it as a fight for the survival of Hungary and also a fight for sovereignty. They feel that Brussels is too much intervening in their everyday life. But on the other hand, they also feel that Brussels is really too imperialistic. That's also how Orban explained it. He said Brussels is really behaving like an Moscow in the past, and he feels the EU is becoming an empire intervening in Hungary's daily affairs. And of course, that's also part, I have to say, of his election campaign ahead of the European elections. So all that plays a role in Hungary's position, I think.
In that context, the context of Hungarian popular opinion being very mistrustful of what it sees as a imperialistic instinct on the part of Brussels, a story which the Financial Times ran this week, which was based on what appears to have been a leaked memo drafted by Brussels bureaucrats. Very important to say that this is not an official document. It is just that, a leaked memo. We don't actually know who leaked it or why, and it is just the Financial Times that it was leaked to. But that story was about the memo apparently indicating a plan on the part of certain elements in Brussels to sabotage the Hungarian economy as a way of gaining leverage. How was that story received in Budapest, Stefan?
Well, the Hungarian Prime Minister was asked about it, that a senior European Council official had dismissed the information published by the Financial Times. But Orban said, we are not just out of kindergarten. And he said that if the document published in the Financial Times describes a financial blockade against Hungary in detail, such a scenario exists for sure.
Now, from a Brussels perspective, there are two sort of crucial dates coming up that are causing existential angst. One of them being, of course, the upcoming EU parliamentary elections. And then in July, none other than Hungary and Viktor Orban is set to take over the rotating presidency of the Council of Europe. Is this a timeline that is being anticipated with... how is this timeline being anticipated in Budapest, Stefan?
The government of Hungary says it sees no reason why Hungary should not get the EU presidency. They say they are preparing for it. They see no problem in hosting it, despite, of course, concerns in Brussels about the rule of law here, and I have to say also about a crackdown on press freedom. I mean, I myself and some other colleagues were even on a black list here. So clearly there are some issues. On the other hand, Hungary feels that this is more a debate about its views and about how it sees the future of Ukraine than about those issues I mentioned.
So a rocky road ahead, Stefan. I mean, would it be fair to say that the EU has everything to lose and Orban has everything to gain?
It's an interesting question. Well, of course, if the EU will not compromise with the Prime Minister, then there is the danger of Hungary really expressing its veto over very important issues. On the other hand, of course, it's quite amazing that a country of less than 10 million people can have so much influence within the EU. So, there is a lot of frustration over this. But I think in the end, there will be a compromise. They need each other clearly, but that remains to be seen whether indeed that will play out as Brussels hopes it will be.
Our Budapest correspondent Stefan Boss there. As news of Thursday's deal broke, Viktor Orban, by the way, was posting pictures of himself on social media, walking around tractors ahead of a farmers' protest in Brussels. In neighbouring France, farmers have also been taking to the streets, engaged in what is promising to be a protracted and bitter struggle with the government and also the European Commission in Brussels. Although the government quickly satisfied one demand that sparked the movement, restoring a subsidy on diesel fuel for farm vehicles that it had scrapped, the farmers are refusing to return to their fields before other measures are taken to protect their livelihoods. In the meantime, they are blocking motorways and roundabouts across France, with several units of tractor-borne protesters even surrounding the capital and threatening to blockade the central wholesale food market at Rungis. John Lawrenson has this report from a roundabout south of Paris.
A teenager wearing the traditional French peasant beret blasts on his hunting horn while fellow farmers distribute potatoes chosen because they're more or less heart-shaped to motorists. But as the saying almost goes, there's no such thing as a free potato. A few minutes ago, tractors moved in from all sides of the roundabout, not to block traffic completely, but to seriously bottleneck it. Now motorists are stuck in queues as far as the eye can see in all directions. Simon Thierry, who's also wearing a beret, has a 200-hectare farm where he grows wheat, barley and potatoes and raises sheep.
La nature de notre action, c'est d'interpeller le gouvernement puis l'Europe en général pour...
We're here to alert the government and Europe in general to the farming crisis. On this roundabout, we're all organic farmers, but we have plenty of demands in common with all the farmers demonstrating around the country. On fuel subsidies, for example, or the need to reduce bureaucracy. And like so many farmers, it's very difficult for us to make ends meet. We are now just 3 people for the whole farm, and we are struggling to keep 1 employee. We love this job, but we work too hard. We're angry because there's no recognition of the positive impact we have on society and the environment.
Positif sur la société, sur l'environnement.
Some drivers honk their horns in support as they drive by, even though they've been stuck in traffic jams caused by the farmers.
On a beaucoup d'habitants et qui nous soutiennent.
Wheat grower and miller Jérôme Chenvert says it warms his heart to know they're not alone.
Ça montre qu'on n'est pas les seuls dans la même galère, voilà.
Many French farmers want a radical change of direction, not only in France but in Europe. They reject the EU's Green Deal that aims to make farming carbon neutral, dramatically reduce the use of pesticides and fertiliser, and take 10% of land out of production. Organic farmers have a different perspective on that, but they also want Europe to change tack when it comes to free trade. Jérôme Chenvert wants more tariff barriers, protection.
Aujourd'hui, faut être clair, l'agriculture a besoin de prix.
What we need is decent prices. Only then will we get a decent income. To do that, what we have to do is stop imports from outside Europe. Because outside of Europe, farmers don't have to abide by the same norms as we do. 20 years ago, a ton of organic wheat was worth between 400 and 500 euros. This year, we got 200.
Par exemple, valait entre 450 € et 500 € la tonne.
As the traffic queues grow longer, I walk down the lines of cars asking drivers whether they support the farmers.
Petit mot sur les agriculteurs qui vous bloquent un peu là.
Nearly all do. This woman says they're right, they must keep going. Things have to change. I'm in favour, says this driver. They're badly paid for everything they do. They're right to fight. National opinion polls confirm this popularity, showing over 80% of French people support the farmers, despite the considerable disruption they're bringing to the country. John Lawrenson, DW, Longvilliers, France.
Coming up in a minute, a new report into the food systems of the future celebrates a timely release. Could it provide answers to some of the problems faced by Europe's farmers? That's still to come here on Inside Europe with me, Kate Laycock in Germany. The farmers' protests are yet another indication that something is seriously wrong with our current system of food production. By timely coincidence, this week marked the release of a new and incredibly ambitious report produced by leading economists and scientists of the Food System Economics Commission, FSEC. In the report, the scientists provide the most comprehensive modelling of the impacts of two possible futures for the global food system to date: our current trends pathway and the food system transformation pathway. Now, the current trends pathway is bleak. The report's modelling shows that food systems are currently destroying more value than they create, leading to food insecurity, biodiversity loss, and driving around a third of global greenhouse gas emissions. The food system transformation pathway, however, could create up to $10 trillion worth of benefits a year, improve human health, and ease the climate crisis. To find out more, I spoke to FSEC Commissioner and Head of Climate Resilience at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Professor Hermann Lotzer-Kampen, who immediately told me how fortuitous the report's timing had turned out to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting. I come from a farm myself, from a dairy farm in northern Germany. And so actually there was quite a direct connection to the release of our report and the current protests of farmers. And I think livestock production, that's the main challenge in the transformation, because one has to acknowledge that we are creating, or agriculture and food systems create all these external and hidden costs. But in the current farming system, livestock production, so meat and dairy production, creates a high share of the value added in farming. So by demanding this transformation, it's also important to show options for change or new opportunities for farmers. And that's a real challenge, because you have to change the demand side, of course. I mean, livestock farmers say, well, as long as people demand meat, we will produce it. We need to produce it. But also, if the demand would change, then farmers would need to find new opportunities. And that's the big challenge, I think, in the near term over the next 10 to 20 years, I guess. How quickly do markets for alternative products emerge, and how quickly can farmers adjust to that? We take that into account to some degree in the scenarios. So, for example, if there is a higher demand for plant-based food, you have additional demand for, let's say, legumes like peas and beans and things like that, which creates new markets for farmers who grow that. But we are also including an additional demand for bio-based materials, because we have to consider, I mean, it's not only the farming system which needs to transform for climate change mitigation, also the energy sector and the industrial sector. So there will be an additional demand for bioplastics, for bio-based materials, for buildings and so on. And this will also create additional demand for farmers, so that we see there is the potential for shifting away out of livestock production and towards new products. But how quickly and how economically viable for the single farm that is of course up to debate, and we need to see how this can go forward. And it also depends on the policy, the political measures, the policy instruments, and maybe we should also talk a little bit about that, what policymakers could and should do to actually implement this transformation.
Well, yes, please. I mean, if you've got concrete tools there, please lay them on the table, Professor.
The first is, not surprisingly, on dietary change. So incentivizing the uptake of plant-based and low meat, low dairy diets. Then there is the area of repurposing of current subsidies. I mean, the agriculture sector is heavily subsidized in many countries, particularly in the EU. And the current subsidies are not targeted towards greenhouse gas emission reduction or biodiversity protection. And there has been a discussion about targeting the existing subsidies towards better achieving those goals which are on the table. The third element is new policy instruments, for example, pricing of greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, in the EU, including the agriculture sector into the emission trading scheme, or taxing nitrogen surpluses. So new instruments which also generate government revenues, which can then be used for financing social safety nets. The fourth area is innovation. We certainly need a lot of innovation along the food value chain, innovation in farming, more efficient fertilizer use, precision farming, but also in the food sector, new food products, alternatives to meat and dairy, whether they are plant-based or based on other technologies. And the fifth area is then social safety nets and compensation payments to make sure that poor consumers, but also low-income farmers and farm workers are able to participate in the transformation. So these are the 5 policy priority areas which we sketched out.
And are you confident that you will be able to have those conversations? Because, I mean, one thing that one hears time and time again from farmers is it's the same concerns. You know, farmers are suffering a massive mental health crisis, much more at risk of suicide than other professional groups, a sense of not being listened to, a sense of dismay that their role in society is not valued as it once was, a sense that they see themselves as custodians of the land, but that environmentalists now have identified them as part of the problem. Do you think that these conversations will be possible? I mean, are you having these conversations already?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, my sister and her husband, they are managing the farm where I grew up. The farm actually last summer started to use a milking robot, so they are also into new technologies there. But an important thing also from the report is, in the current debate about farmers' protests, whether it's in Germany or France and other countries, is there is a lack of a long-term vision where the ag and food sector could move towards to. And I think this was quite nice to see. I think this report provides a substantial outlook and vision where I think the ag and farming sector would need to go to solve many of the problems we have, also to fulfill the requirements which have already been agreed upon, like the Paris Agreement or other international agreements. And so I think this report can help in the discussion, in the political discussion between farmers' unions, governments, other civil society organizations to create a joint vision, which then can be pursued by policymakers and also, farmers and everyone else within the food system to achieve those goals. So we certainly hope that it's helpful in this direction.
I was speaking to FSEC Commissioner and Head of the Climate Resilience Research Department at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, Professor Hermann Lotze-Kampen. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany.